A crumpled $5 bill slid across the table and stopped in front of her, like a challenge no one had spoken out loud. The rain was pounding against the windows of the nearly empty diner when Naomi Brooks, a black waitress nearing the end of another brutal double shift, looked down at the man sitting alone in booth 6. He smelled of wet wool and cold nights, his hands shaking as he wrapped them around a chipped coffee mug. To everyone else, he was just another homeless old man who wandered in too late and asked for too little. But something in his eyes made Naomi pause. The diner manager had already tried to throw him out. Naomi stepped in without thinking, offering him soup bread and a seat by the heater on her own tab. She didn't know that the man hunched over that bowl was actually Henry Calloway, a reclusive billionaire disguising himself as a beggar searching for proof that humanity still existed beyond boardrooms and inheritance lawyers. When Henry finished eating, he stood slowly and left a single $5 bill on the table. For Naomi, $5 meant bus fare. It meant part of her rent. It meant medicine for her young daughter. The room seemed to hold its breath as she picked it up and then pressed it gently back into his palm. "I can't take this," she said quietly. "In my space, guests don't pay for kindness." That sentence landed harder than any business loss Henry had ever faced. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by greed, especially from his own children, Marcus and Elena Calloway, who were already circling his fortune like vultures. In that worn-down diner soaked by rain and stripped of status, Henry found what money had never bought him: dignity freely given. And in that moment, with only $5 between them, the fate of a billion-dollar empire quietly changed forever. By the time Henry Calloway stepped back into the rain, the $5 bill still warm in his palm, something inside him had already cracked. For decades, Henry had ruled from the top of glass towers and private jets, feared in boardrooms, and obeyed without question. His empire was worth billions, but his world had grown painfully small. Just 1 week earlier, a doctor with careful eyes and a steady voice had given him the truth: no fortune could negotiate stage 4 cancer. Months, not years. The clock was no longer theoretical. When Henry told his children, their reactions confirmed what he had long suspected but refused to face. Marcus immediately asked about controlling shares. Elena wanted reassurance that the trusts were protected. Neither asked how much time he had left. Neither asked how he felt. In that moment, Henry understood with terrifying clarity that his legacy would not be carried forward by love, but consumed by greed. That night, sleep never came. Instead, an idea formed, dangerous, simple, and final. If blood could not be trusted, perhaps character could. Henry decided to test the world the way the world tests the powerless. He stripped himself of status, wrapped his body in rags, and stepped into places where his name meant nothing. The results were brutal. Luxury hotels turned him away without eye contact. Fine restaurants escorted him out as if he were contagious. Security guards shoved him into the rain while patrons pretended not to see. In every polished space built by money, humanity vanished the moment dignity couldn't pay for entry. By the 5th rejection, Henry felt something close to despair. Not because of how he was treated, but because it was consistent, predictable, cold. Then came the diner. Inside that flickering, grease-stained room, no one knew who he was. And yet Naomi Brooks saw him. She didn't ask what he could offer. She didn't flinch at his smell or his clothes. She didn't perform kindness for applause. She simply acted quietly, instinctively, at personal cost. As Henry replayed her words, "Guests don't pay for kindness," they echoed louder than any speech he had ever given. Naomi had less than nothing, yet she gave him dignity without hesitation. Not because it benefited her, but because it was right. Standing in the alley where his driver waited in silence, Henry straightened his spine. The test was over. He hadn't found an heir in his bloodline. He had found one in a woman who treated a stranger like a human being when no one was watching. And that realization would soon shake his empire far more violently than his death ever could. The truth Henry Calloway could no longer ignore was this: the people closest to him had never truly been close at all. For years he had excused it as ambition. He told himself that Marcus and Elena were sharp, because the world was sharp, ruthless, because success demanded it. He had rewarded their cold efficiency, funded their excesses, silenced their failures with money. In doing so, he had trained them well, just not as human beings. Now facing the end, the illusion collapsed. When Henry lay awake at night, it wasn't fear of death that haunted him. It was the certainty that everything he built would become fuel for people who had never built anything themselves. His children didn't see a lifetime of work. They saw leverage, control, entitlement. Even in his sickness, they hovered like accountants over a balance sheet, waiting for the final number. Henry realized something bitter and liberating at the same time. Legacy is not inherited, it is earned. Naomi Brooks had earned something his children never had. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his wealth. She didn't even know if he would ever come back. Yet she treated him with a dignity that cost her more than money. It cost her security. She gave while standing on the edge of losing everything herself. That kind of character couldn't be taught in business school or purchased with trust funds. As the city lights blurred past the tinted windows of his car, Henry felt an unfamiliar clarity. For the first time in decades, he wasn't calculating risk. He wasn't protecting assets. He was choosing meaning. He thought of Naomi's tired eyes, her steady voice, the way she spoke about her daughter, not with bitterness, but with quiet hope. He thought of how naturally she took responsibility for a stranger's comfort, not because it was expected, but because it was human. That was the kind of person his empire should belong to, not someone who would exploit it, someone who would protect others with it. Henry knew what would follow: outrage lawsuits, public humiliation, accusations of insanity. His children would call him cruel. The media would call him reckless. Lawyers would warn him of consequences. But none of that mattered anymore, because in a rain-soaked diner, stripped of power and identity, Henry had finally seen the truth. A fortune left to the wrong hands is a curse. A fortune placed in the right heart is a second chance. And for the first time since his diagnosis, Henry Calloway felt at peace, not because he was dying, but because he finally knew who deserved to live on through what he left behind. Henry Calloway did not make the decision lightly, but once it was made, it settled into him with the weight of truth. Back in his penthouse, surrounded by marble floors and quiet that money had bought but never softened, Henry replayed the night again and again. Naomi Brooks standing under harsh fluorescent lights, exhaustion carved into her posture. The way she spoke of her daughter, not asking for sympathy, not begging for help, just stating facts, and still choosing kindness. She hadn't known she was being watched. That was what mattered most. He summoned his attorney before dawn. The man arrived with legal pads and cautious eyes, already sensing the storm. "Arthur Henry," he corrected himself. "Are you certain about this direction?" Henry didn't hesitate. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." They went over the details slowly. Trust structures, blind timelines, safeguards, everything designed to protect Naomi from what would inevitably come next. Because Henry was not naive. He knew his children would not accept this quietly. Marcus would threaten. Elena would manipulate. They would call Naomi a gold digger, accuse her of manipulation, drag her past into headlines and courtrooms. That was why Henry insisted on secrecy. Naomi would not know, not yet. The fortune would be sealed, the beneficiary unnamed, until after his death. Let the vultures believe they had won. Let them expose themselves fully. As the pen hovered over the final page, Henry paused, not from doubt, but from reflection. He thought about what Naomi would do if she suddenly had power. Not the extravagance she might buy, but the dignity she would restore. He imagined her daughter never again counting inhalers or eviction notices. He imagined employees treated as people, not numbers. He imagined an empire that no longer crushed those beneath it. "That waitress," Henry said quietly, "has more integrity than every boardroom I've ever